the country and abroad. They're known for their exemplary design and high level of professionalism. They also teach very nicely at SPA, and Minesh himself has served in my position as the chair of the ISOLA Delhi chapter for 2 terms from 2012 to 2016. And he is a senior consultant to the Delhi Urban Arts Commission on several city level projects. And his recent contributions include redevelopment of proposals for Connaught Place, um, the redevelopment of the Baoli, redevelopment of the Ignu Road, and redevelopment of the Chanakya Greens. So he's a fellow member of ISOLA, and he's going to be one of our speakers. So let's all give a hand or a thumbs up maybe to, since you're all on silent, to Minesh. Our second speaker is Yusuf. Yusuf Arsiwala. He is a co-founder, he's a founder of Root Bridge Collab. That is a multidisciplinary design practice, majorly focusing on projects related with water-based ecosystems. He has worked globally across both government and corporate sectors with a keen interest in the realm of urban design, urban planning, and landscape design. He's actively involved in large-scale public projects like restoration and rejuvenation of water bodies and drains in Delhi, Gomti Riverfront in Lucknow, and various smart city projects. He holds a master's degree of architecture, in urban design from CEPT, Ahmedabad, and a Bachelor of Architecture from Sarvajanik College of Engineering and Technology, Surat. Welcome, Yusuf. Thank you for volunteering to be one of our speakers. And our third speaker is Sehna Goswami. Sehna is the manager of the Cities program at WRI India. She works on urban water issues with a focus on water-based water body restoration, blue-green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, and reuse and resource recovery from urban wastewater streams. Her prior research experience includes development of fact sheets on water resources, planning for Southeast Wisconsin region, and journal papers on equity planning and economic development schemes of local governments in the US. She has also worked as an architect and urban planner in a private architecture and design firm in India. She holds a master's in urban planning from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and a bachelor in architecture from the School of Planning and Architecture, Hyderabad, JNTU, Hyderabad. So welcome, Sehna. Thank you for volunteering and making time. Our team has been practicing and very actively and very hard, our speakers, to give you a wonderful presentation. I'd like to say this is one of two presentations. We're going to have one today and one next week. I'll send out the Zoom invite of that again early next week. Please attend both, and I'll hand it over to them. I just want to explain one thing, though, is that we are, as you know, you're all ISOLA members. If you guys are not, but are landscape architects from accredited universities, please join ISOLA. Please make the effort to join ISOLA. We have really a wonderful active group of landscape architects in India, and we want a lot of participation, especially from the younger people. And what we're doing now is doing a sort of series of talks, given that we are not able to meet in person, take walks in person. We are now doing these series of talks. We've already had one on excellent talks on streetscape planning by Anuj Malhotra and Sujata Hingorani. We're going to now delve into water and wastewater issues. And then later, we're going to soon talk about planting, native planting, rewilding, and so on. So we have a series of ideas that are going to unfold over the next year. We encourage your participation. We would like you to participate with us, join our committees. And also we have one committee going where we're going to write articles about landscape architecture. We want you to give us articles that we can publish. So just to give you a little pitch for our Delhi chapter, we are trying to muster a lot of steam here and showcase our local talent. So we're very keen to showcase our local talent instead of reaching out all over the world. That's also good. We want to show, we have a lot of talent, local talent, and we want to showcase our local talent. So with that, Thank you for beginning the recording, Harpreet. And now I hand it over to Minesh to start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya. It is indeed my honor to be co-presenting along with Yusuf and Sahana, and who bring different strengths to the table for this forum of discussion. And as we go along, you will see how diverse the skill and the achievements of the today's presenters are. So there couldn't have been a better time to discuss issues pertaining to water. Water actually is very, very contextual today. Our country, has seen these kind of waves of projects coming through. We had highways and airports and institutions like AIIMS and IITs. A lot of work on water is just beginning. So state after state and city after city is taking up projects on water. And every design professional is today very keen to not only participate in the water related projects, but also to a little bit upgrade the skill and learn or acquire techniques with which professionals can stay relevant. And in that context, today's seminar is very, very contextual, because it will throw light on a variety of water related issues which can really help increase the skill levels of various professionals. This seminar will be conducted in two parts. So there is a session 1 and there is a session 2. And session 1, we are largely going to focus on issues pertaining to water. And in session 2, we are going to deal with some case studies and some ongoing or executed projects, which can really impart learning about how to deal with water. So I think we will begin with my co-speaker Sahana. Aditya has already given a very nice introduction to her. Interestingly, she works with an organization called WRI. So there are several organizations which are doing pioneering work in water, and some of them we know, like NEERI and WASPCOS. WRI is a global organization. It's more focused on advocacy. So Sahana will take us through. She'll introduce what WRI does, and then she'll take us through key issues pertaining to water. Its its availability, scarcity, quality of water, other issues. So I think over to Sahana.
Thank you, Parikh sir, and thank you, Advani sir, for that very kind introduction. Yusuf, would you please start sharing the screen as well? So really, thank you to ISOLA as well for inviting me to present at this forum some of WRI India's work. Really thanks to Yusuf for making the connect, because we know him and he obviously is part of ISOLA. So as sir, yeah, Yusuf.
Sorry, can I get the permission to share the screen?
Yeah, please check now, Yusuf.
Yeah, okay.
Yusuf, you can go to the WRI first slide already. If you, yeah, thank you so much. So as Sir explained, I work with WRI India's urban water team. We are a research organization, and our mission is to move human society to live in ways that protect the Earth's environment and its capacity to provide for our needs and aspirations, not just of us today, but for current and future generations. The next slide, if you please, Yusuf. So we are part of a global network. We have, it's a sisterhood, if you will, and we are present in multiple countries. But other than our international offices, we have projects in across 50 countries across the world right now. And our work spans across various sectors. We have 7 core areas that we work in, that is food, forest, water, cities, energy, climate, and oceans. My work at WRI India really is at this sort of cusp of cities and water, because we look at urban water issues. Next slide, please, Yusuf. So we identify 3 major challenges centered around water in urban areas. And we obviously have been developing a lot of research based on primary and secondary data, focused primarily on Indian cities, but across our global network, we have work across different regions in the world as well. But our focus right now would be mostly India. The next slide, please, Yusuf. So one of the key things that we see in terms of challenges is that our cities and communities, whether rich or poor actually, struggle very often with too little water. And there are clear implications of this on health and livelihood impacts. And as this COVID pandemic has really reinforced again that having access to water is so critical in just health and well-being of urban dwellers. Next slide, Yusuf, please. And while we have this issue of too little water, we are regularly beset with excess water as well, which enters our homes and offices and our businesses, causing this loss of life and property. And again, health concerns from illnesses because of waterborne diseases. And finally, in the next slide, what we see is that beyond too much water, what we have is too dirty water. So this is just pollution, which is impacting all our environments, impacting our water-based ecosystems and poisoning our biodiversity in these ecosystems. And eventually what it does is really restricts our access in urban areas to the very few natural spaces that we have. And we do know that having access to natural spaces definitely has connections with the physical and mental well-being of people who live in cities. Next slide, please. So while we have these challenges with water, they are not just happening. They're not just happening in a vacuum, and we can't just directly say that they are only because of climate change. We know that it is a big factor because we have this increasing frequency and intensity because of sudden rain events or excessive droughts. But to a great part of it, a great extent of it is also driven by our activity and human actions. Next slide, please. So how do we interconnect human actions to what we see on ground? So where we build becomes critical. So if we have built our roads and houses and offices, business parks on areas which used to be paths where water used to flow, it is natural. It is really logical that eventually water will find its way back to these spaces. So this is just a snapshot from Bangalore. Google Earth images, not really high tech, just looking at images from 2003 and 2020. And we can clearly see that this defined green zone, which was lakes and wetlands, in 2003 has been completely covered up, and we just see individual lakes and a lot of built up space. And this is an area which recently got extremely flooded in Bangalore just a month ago after one night of rainfall. So where we build again is a critical concern. And the next slide, please. Alongside where we build, the question is how extensively we are building. And we are really drastically changing the watersheds and the natural landscapes. We continuously replace areas which used to be able to soak up water with tarred roads or concrete surfaces and other impermeable layers. And eventually rainwater or stormwater is just going to flow off these in larger volumes in quicker rates and lead to events like flooding. Again, this is just a compilation of Google Earth images for the city of Hyderabad near one lake between 2003 to 2019. And we can see distinctly see the amount of change that we have brought about. The next slide, please, Yusuf. So while what we are doing in terms of our activity as we modify nature in our cities, we are eliminating or constraining our natural spaces, these blue-green spaces like wetlands and lakes. And our cities where we build infrastructure and storm drains, if we build them at all, like that's another question. But where we build them, they're really not capable of meeting the stresses brought about both by the way we have built our cities and the events because of climate change. And this is not just India. It's not just to point out that this is happening in India. This image is from Houston, Texas, 2016. They had an extremely severe Hurricane Harvey. And following that, there was just flooding, rampant flooding all over. But post this event, the amount of analysis that was done really pointed out the way the city had expanded, consuming its wetlands and streams, really led to this event. So there are things that we must be learning from this, of course. The next slide, please, Yusuf. So WRI India has been developing some research based on a study of satellite imagery using remote sensing techniques. And I'll be very happy to share some of these preliminary findings for the Delhi region specifically, because I think that'll be of interest to you. But again, please keep in mind, this is preliminary. It's subject to change as we go on. Next slide, please, Yusuf. So first off, what we looked at is what we call built up area. So this is roads and buildings. And we looked at an area of 50 kilometers from the center of Delhi. And what we see is extensively between 2000 to 2015, this built up area, that footprint has remarkably increased. What we call the core city area might have seen a little lesser increase. It's about 20% increase, but between 20 to 50 kilometers, it's 116% increase. And you are people from Delhi, and you do know that this region of between 20 to 50 kilometers is where Gurgaon falls, where Noida falls. Clearly, there are interconnections with where and how we are building and how that's changing the natural environment. But how exactly has it changed the natural environment? If we see the next slide, what we see is vegetation cover, what we are looking at here. And again, in the 0 to 20 kilometer region, if you look at the table, the top row, we see that there is low loss and low gain, which is fairly similar. But in the 20 to 50, we definitely, that low loss is huge. It's like 1700 square kilometers that's lost. And what does this low loss or high loss, what does it mean in terms of a study? So to sort of put it in simple terms, high loss would indicate that there was a forest and it was chopped away. High gain means that an entire forest grew in the 50 kilometer region. That's not happened for Delhi. But the amount of low loss, meaning that small scale vegetation has definitely been impacted. And of course, there's one point to be made of inequity, if you will, that core city of Delhi definitely has much more green spaces than the rest of the areas. And again, we know that having access to vegetation, along with the physical and mental health and well-being aspects, there's just the clear impacts on microclimate, on pollution, etc., that might be felt. And there's this inequity that Central Delhi definitely is getting a better deal out of this right now. And in the next slide, there's one other aspect that we looked at, which was groundwater recharge potential. And I think this is something that, considering the water situation in Delhi, and Delhi is fairly groundwater dependent, like much of India. What this study, in the study, what we looked at is in between 2000 and 2015, where has new development occurred? And we looked at assigning different recharge potential values based on vegetation cover and slope. I mean, there's obviously complex equations to that, but this is the sort of mapping we get of where new development has occurred and has it what sort of recharge potential zones it has consumed. And what we see is 33% of new development that has happened in the entire, that 50 kilometer study region that we had, has been on high recharge potential zone. And if we go to the next slide, what we see is what is the implication of that? What happens if we are building on high recharge potential zones? So on one hand, Delhi is fairly highly dependent on groundwater, but because we have built on areas where groundwater could potentially have been recharged, we have lost that volume. That volume is no longer recharging. And what is that volume that is lost? And this is some estimates again that we have done in this study, is 286 million liters per day, which is huge. And if we just consider the population that's been added in Delhi, about 8.8 million in the last 2000 to 2015 time period, 32% of that demand could have been met from this 286 million liters. And there are implications clearly, because that water, instead of the Delhi water utility having to source from elsewhere, potentially could have come from groundwater if we had done it, if we had thought of this. So clearly there's this connection that we have to think of between how and where we are growing and how it impacts our resources such as groundwater. The next slide, please. So before I go into sort of explaining what's on the slide, one thing to think of, that all this research that I've shown, how does it impact us as landscape designers, or why should we consider this? And I believe, truly believe, that in your professional capacity as landscape designers, you have this ability to implement change, whether it's large or small. We don't have, not everyone has to be doing huge projects, but whether it's the smallest, most effective rainwater harvesting system that you're able to construct for your client, or a rain garden that you're able to do, or an entire lake restoration or a rewilding of a park, all of those efforts can make a difference to the city's water scenario and water ecosystem, and eventually the entire natural ecosystem that we have. But alongside what we can do, the other thing is urgency. We need to do it soon, because we know if we continue with what we have done so far, this business as usual practice that we have, it is just going to keep on increasing the severity and quantum of our losses, because that isn't going to change. We do know that from climate change, that rainfall is going to get more erratic, it is going to get more frequent, more extreme. And how are we designing our cities to be more resilient to that becomes really the key question. So next slide, please. So this brings us to the question of this future. What is it in this future that we should envision or think of? And at WRI India, what we strongly believe is that our solutions will be derived from nature. So nature-based solutions or blue-green infrastructure, systems which leverage nature's adaptive capacities. These will really be the future for our cities infrastructure. And unless we figure out ways to integrate them into our projects, into small and large, we really have to do that to be moving into this resilient urban future. An urban future which is going to be beneficial for us as we grow older, for our future generations who are going to come. So the next slide, if you will, please, Yusuf. And how will that work? So that's all that is abstraction and saying we have to become resilient and so on, but how would it pan out? So if we just frame it within the too much, too little, too dirty saga that we have, what can we potentially do from a perspective of managing water? So the first thing potentially that could be done is, when we have water arriving on our sites, on our cities, we slow them down. So imagine parks and gardens which are able to absorb this rainwater as it falls, green roofs and so on. The next option is to collect. So we store them in underground tanks or in wetlands or lakes in natural systems. And next we increase the potential for infiltration. So we send it back into our groundwater aquifers. And finally, if we have followed all these steps and we have water left in excess, then we think of letting it go through a wetland so that it's treated and then into streams and then conveyed out of the city. So that's really the trajectory we are hoping that we are able to revision and think of water. For all our projects, big or small, if this is the trajectory or thought process we can have, maybe we can make a difference. Yusuf, last slide, please. Thank you. And this is not just from a design aspect, which is key, because we have to rethink of how we are putting in these systems, but there are these interlinked aspects of how the environment gets impacted, how hydrology gets impacted. And unless our projects get a little more holistic in thinking of the design, the hydrology, the environment, and eventually the social aspects as well. Are we building parks and kicking out people who used to live there? Maybe there were informal settlements and so on, but are we able to provide them with services and not just a certain class of people? That really has to be thought of as we look at landscape and urban planning frameworks for the future, so that our cities are not just resilient and sustainable, but also equitable and livable for all of us. So thanks, Yusuf. That's it from my side. Back to Minesh sir. Yes, I am done with my slides. I think Yusuf will take on next.
Thanks, Sahana. Now, Sahana has spoken about the larger aspect, or what are the larger problems that are being faced, especially all across India, all across world, and has given some idea of what is the situation that is coming up in Delhi. Now, I would bring down this scale to a more to a scale of an idea that our landscape architects and architects can understand, and then discuss the problem with those aspects. So, what are the larger issues? I mean, Sahana has already gone through it, but I mean, I will be talking at a scale which is more relevant, and something can happen right now at this scale. As you know, that my question is, what water, when we talk about water, is water merely an infrastructure problem right now? Or there are certain other aspects that are underlying this issue. So around 20% of Delhi still does not have access to clean water. 30% of Delhi is exploiting groundwater, as Sahana has already given a figure of how much groundwater loss that we have done based on our building and increasing of the population. But there is still a lot of dependency that is happening on ground. Around 40% of Delhi population which is getting water in a piped manner is not accounted for. So the agencies which are providing water is also running at a loss. So we are still building upon the centralized, massive, expensive water infrastructure, and it is completely getting us outdated as we move ahead. It costs us money, valuable public land, and are not environmental resilient as we know of it. So what are the gaps? Why do we feel that water's infrastructure is lagging behind? The most important idea why this is happening is that the water infrastructure and the natural water systems, they are not being looked together. They are being looked very differently, as in both of this exist in a different domain. So even if my question to the audience is, I don't know how many of you know what is your source of water. I mean, from where your water is coming. Is it coming from groundwater? Is it coming from a river? Is it coming from a lake? So even people are not, they do not know from where the water is coming, and that is the gap which is coming up across Delhi and across India. The system of getting water is directly proportional to how water comes into existence, and it is available naturally. And this is a point which has been completely ignored right now. When we talk about history of Delhi and history of tanks and Bawlis and how the water infrastructure at that time was there. So it clearly states that historically Delhi had this decentralized water infrastructure that were used to that used groundwater as a source. We had around more than 100 Bawlis historically which were present in Delhi. Only 10 exist right now, that too in not a very good shape, and out of that 0 are in use in its original form. Most of them either are archaeological sites and being used as tourist destinations. So when we talk about water bodies as such, these were essentially public spaces before, because people related with water. People went to fetch the water, and then the whole experience was being lighted with this. If you see this is Agra Singh Ki Bawli in CP, you see the architecture and the landscape that was done around the idea of fetching the water. So we could realize how historically water was important to people and their lives, and it was completely known from where your water is kind of coming. So which is not the case right now. So this is the state of affairs right now. Now, I mean, we have seen the Agra Singh Ki Bawli and the public space it created around it, and now we see what is the case. People are because there is 30% of people who do not have access, 20 to 30% people do not have access to clean water. This is the state of affairs. This is the state of affairs in Delhi right now. So we have lost all connections with water. When we started looking at it as a mere infrastructure issue, when we started looking just water which is coming out of tap and it's a necessity, but there is no relationship which was there. So that relationship is completely gone of people, water, and public space. And then what is happening because of that? So because of that, our cities are impacted with large pollution. Delhi is famous for its air pollution around the world right now. It's ranked amongst the 10 most polluted city in the world. The water pollution is there. Yamuna is most polluted. Around 40 to 50% of the pollution load that is coming into Yamuna, that happens into Delhi, and this is nothing to be proud of right now. It creates serious economical, social, cultural, and environmental impact. The investments are hindered. The foreign investments that we all talk about, actually people do not, the expats, foreign expats who wants to come and settle into Delhi, they have serious reservations of coming and settling into Delhi because of the nature of our environment and nature of our ecology. So we all know that this is the problem. So in 2016, Delhi Jal Board actually realized that this is a problem that is happening at a large scale, and to look at into perspective, they said that why don't we improve the situation which is happening. Now if we talk about or quantify the problem if you want to quantify, we have to restore around 750 kilometers of surface drain, around 1,000 water bodies. We have to recharge around 1,500 square kilometers of underground water, which will eventually improve the quality of water in river Yamuna. And then after all this is done, the city's economic and ecological value would increase across the global scale. So to do that, Delhi Jal Board employed and got a designing planning cell, which was a multidisciplinary cell headed by urban planner, landscape architects, urban designers, wastewater experts, hydraulic experts, and GIS experts. So their main aim was to look into these projects which can happen on ground to improve the quality of the existing water bodies, drains, and of course river Yamuna. So the strategy that the team adopted was to strategize and implement pilots, set standards which would be helpful from the learnings of the pilots, roll out in a phased manner, improve the processes and standards after we learn the pilot's performance across the time, monitor positive impacts, and then further roll out in the city. The idea of doing a pilot, it of course helps us to realize what were the drawbacks or what are the challenges ahead, and before we actually roll out across the city. Now, we know that Delhi is a massive area with a massive population across the city, crunched into a very small area. When we talk about Delhi, we talk about 3 drainage basins. One is the Najafgarh Basin, one is the Barapula Basin, which is the south, in the south part, and other one is the Shadra Basin. So the Shadra Basin is in the east, and the Najafgarh is in the north, northwest, and Barapula is in the south and southeast. So the idea was that we look into basins and divide it into sub basins. So the basins are very large area to tackle at a time. So we come down to smaller sub basins and then look into those sub basins, the water bodies and drains into those sub basins, and start planning out pilot projects in that area. The method is pretty simple. The approach is that we want to clean the drains and water body, restore the ecological value, and then it would eventually create into an economic value for the city. The 7 steps that that was devised by the team was we identify all the point sources of pollution in a particular water body or drain. We identify the appropriate technology that would help in cleaning the water. There would be coordination with the local authorities for sludge, septage, and solid waste management. We restore the ecology value and create a public space for the people. So now the idea of people, water, and public space, they all combine into this 7 steps of method that we would implement. Now, talking about pilots, what are the different types of pilots that can be taken up? So one is, which we have already done, is restore of around 200 water bodies, out of which one water body, which is Rajokri, which has been already developed, and it has been restored on an ecological basis, where the water previously was actually very polluted. We had installed a constructed wetland over there as a blue-green infrastructure, and developed the area around as a landscape public area. The second pilot is we should, because there is a loss of lot of water bodies in Delhi, we need to create newer water bodies. So for that, we would utilize the government land. We would utilize the treated effluent that comes from the STPs, which are right now actually going down into the drains of no use. We would actually polish that treated effluent, which is an asset, and we would use that to create newer water bodies. And with that, we would create a public park. So this is one of the examples where we are doing the similar approach in sector 25 Rohini, where a existing STP of Delhi Jal Board, the land besides that is utilized to create this new water body and public space around it. And the third pilot would be restoring drains. We would identify a stretch of the drain. We would the idea was to also assess and analyze what are the polluting points, look into how we can in situ treat those aspects, and then further develop it into ecological spines of city mobility as well as public spaces. So this in turn would help us create efficient, ecologically sensitive public spaces, park systems, eco-mobility zones, walking and cycling facilities, as well as serve as the cultural aspect of the city, of bringing people back to the water, re-establishing the relationship of people, water, and ecology. Now, as we said, that because we have done certain pilots, we have come across how we can expand it into a larger city level projects, because not all projects can be done by a single authority or a single consultant. So what we did is that we created SOPs for based on our experience of the pilots, and this SOPs would actually have a step-by-step methodology of what all things one needs to do if they want to implement a water body or restore a water body, existing one, if they want to create a new water body, or if they want to restore a drain. So different SOPs were created so that people and authorities and consultants could get step-by-step method of how ecologically you need to restore a system, natural system. We also created certain landscape guidelines for landscape consultants, which can help into ecologically restoring the water body and not use the conventional landscape ideas and park ideas to restore a ecologically sensitive zone. So those aspects were also dealt with in the department. Yeah, pretty much that. So I mean, so in the next session we would discuss in detail what we did in Rajokri, the story of Rajokri, and certain other projects that we have done. So now to Minesh sir.
Thank you, Yusuf. So as different professionals who are participating at different levels to in this great movement of our country to clean up our water, water bodies of different types. We are talking about lakes and ponds. We are talking about drains, what we call drains. We are also talking about rivers. So at the crux of this effort, there are just only two ways of dealing with water. One is mechanical STP, which is, uses multiple technologies and lot of electricity to clean the water, which is not sustainable and which is not viable economically, and which is, with the volume of water we are talking about, which is not the wise way to go. The other method is the natural method. How does water get cleaned in nature by itself? A meandering river, or a lake has its own ecosystem or its own, methods of cleaning itself and staying alive. So a lot of research has been conducted over the last almost 20 years about natural techniques which can be used to clean the water. And when the natural techniques need some supplementing, then there are, some methods which are extremely economical and, capable of working on a large scale. So whether an urban designer or a landscape architect or a water engineer deals with water bodies, at the crux of their effort lie these techniques, which I will run the audience through with. And what you see on screen is a list of these techniques, but most of them, are centered around 2 or 3 basic things. Next, please. Okay, so aerobic bioremediation is basically one of the, the basic natural processes used for cleaning water on a large scale, on a city scale. So water is taken into a tank where you use an oil or a grease separator, and after the separation is done, it's taken into a simple sedimentation tank for removal of physical impurities. And it goes into what is called a constructed wetland, where these special plants, the roots of which have this quality of, breaking down the pollutants and, converting them into plant food. These special plants remove the pollutants from the water, and out comes a reasonably cleaner and purer water. This technique is known to be capable of, cleaning the water to almost more than 90% of its pollutants. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. Now, the same technique can be used in linear water bodies like drains, where, you take a linear, you use the same process, but you do linear compartmentalization. And then, water enters from one end, and by gravity, it keeps flowing through different processes and comes out reasonably clean. So this same method is very successful in using in a linear form to deal with what we call drains. And it has been used, and, it is being used in the pilot also in many of the projects. Next. Now, this is how the section works. So water goes up and down and, through different processes, as I have explained to you, and reasonably clean water comes out. The only thing is that this process is what is called very, very land intensive, and it's a slow process. So, it is not fast, it takes time. and it consumes land. So this process is very successful if we can run it in not in the core of the city, but on its periphery where the land is available more easily. Next, please. So these are the plants, but the most easy and convenient that we know is what we call as canna. Many of the grasses also have this quality. But canna is a very commonly available plant. Cypress alternifolia, which is also known as umbrella palm. So these two are very easy and commonly available plants, and they have this quality of cleaning the water naturally. Next, please. Persnickety 713 is a wonder product. So over several years of research, scientists were able to isolate 5 or 6 different types of naturally occurring bacteria which have the ability to decompose certain specific types of pollutants. So there is a bacteria called Clostridium butyricum, which decomposes the oil in the water. It is very extensively, this bacteria is very extensively used in oil leaks from tankers or oil fields. Then similarly, there are these other bacteria which attack what is called sulfates or oxides of sulfur, SO2, SO3, which are foul smell producing pollutants in the water. And then there are other bacteria which attack the proteins which are bioproducts which are in the water. So Persnickety 713 is a combination of 5 or 6 such bacterium which, if introduced in a natural water body and retained at a temperature of approximately 25 degrees Celsius, plus or minus, you can say 5 degrees Celsius, through the natural action, these bacteria, they multiply and they clean the water. The byproduct of this application is only water and carbon dioxide and oxygen. This product is patented, but it is very useful as a shock treatment before the sustained slow acting natural process starts. So if we start dealing with a water body which is a lake which has been polluted over several years, then the natural process can only slowly clean a part of it. Application of an enzymatic compound like this, removes 60 or 70% of accumulated pollutants in the water within a span of 2-3 months. And the root zone treatment then balances out the recurring or additional pollutant load which keeps getting added to such natural water bodies. So this is, Persnickety is used in combination with other natural processes. Next. So floating wetlands are used, basically the principle of wetland is the same as I have described earlier, but a sealed plastic float is created on top of which, or the wetland plants are planted. The roots percolate into the water, and the action of the root creates a cleansing effect, a cleansing process in the water. The float can be made out of sealed plastic float, or it can even be made out of reeds or bamboo or timber. Any kind of natural material can also be used. It is specifically very useful in very large water bodies where, it can keep traveling from place to place. Next. So SBT is again, it is a part of a process which is researched by IIT Bombay, and several other organizations have done a lot of research in it. The underlying principle here is to create an excessively large surface area using a material like just gravel or something. So the water travels through a bed of gravel very slowly, and the surface of the gravel is impregnated with enzymatic microbes. So a starter seeding is done of the enzyme or the microbes. These microbes, over a period of time, they grow on the very large surface area of the gravel or of whatever we use as the media. And when the water is slowly allowed to pass through an SBT bed, the enzymatic action and the aeration that it causes together creates the cleansing of the water. Next. Yes, root zone treatment is basically the crux of all these kinds of naturally sustainable techniques, and is dependent on these special plants, certain selected plants which, the roots of which have the ability to cleanse the water of its pollutants. Next. So biomedia, as you can see here, are these are what you see here in the image in the center. So using clay or using plastic, these profiles are made which become the harbor for the bacteria which cleans the water. And basic idea here again is to create very large surface area for the bacterium to attach themselves to this and for the action of these bacteria to work. And these can be made out of plastic or these can be made out of clay, but plastic is the easier thing. Clay is a good thing also. And they are again used to cleanse the water. The cleansing action is taken by the bacteria, but the media provides the opportunity for the bacteria to grow in a colony or to harbor themselves or anchor themselves to a large surface area which can create the cleansing action or which can catalyze the cleansing action. Next. Yeah, I think that's mostly it. So we will be having a second session coming Saturday, in which we will be running what is called Yusuf, you can stop the screen share. So we will be running some case studies, some interesting case studies. We will be also taking our audience through several projects which are in different stages of execution or design and planning within India. And our guest Sahana is going to talk about how to deal with the funding of public projects like this. So she has some, she has access to some research on this subject, because funding is always a difficult thing when we deal with the municipal bodies. And right now we are open for any questions if there are any, and then we will conclude this session.
As far as questions go, people can either just unmute themselves, ask the question, and then mute themselves again, or you can type them into the chat and I will ask them for you. You can choose to do what you want. People want to start typing in their questions in the chat mode. I'd be happy to field them present them to the speakers.
Okay, so anybody?
Any questions?
I think Aditya, you can let them, if they raise their hands, you can let them unmute.
They can ask their own questions. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Hi. Good evening, sir. Yeah. Hi. I was wondering if this is just about Delhi. How widespread could it be? I mean, and one more thing about the phytoremediation. Like, what if there are industrial effluents like heavy metals, or like you say that 90% of it would be removed, but even the remaining 10% would be. I mean, yeah, compared to the entirety of it, 90% removed is a far better option. But what about the 10%? I mean, how do we remove all of it? Or is there any chemical process maybe that we could add to this?
Yusuf, you want to take it?
Sure. I couldn't get the first part of your question. I mean, when you're talking about the across the scale, or I'm not sure. So maybe you have to rephrase it and say the second part is with respect to industrial pollution. It is very difficult to actually treat water once it's polluted with industrial waste, especially through this system. You can definitely reduce the load, but there are certain amount of chemicals and certain amount of heavy metals which actually, if taken by the plant, so there are also studies that if heavy metals and all are present in your water, and they can be taken up by plants, and if they again pollinate and within so it spreads across the ecosystem. So because they pollinate somewhere else, and because the bees and the carriers also take it up, so there is a system in which it actually impacts a wider ecosystem. So this is usually when it's treated effluent, when it's contaminated with industrial waste, the best option is to do a CETP, which is a industrial treatment plant. And after that, so not everything can be done in situ. Some things needs to be done before that, before you come and use the natural systems. Why we say that? Because the whole system that is there is actually very much not working. So there are rules where industries are not allowed to actually put their waste into the water, right? So it is presumed that the nature will take care of it with some minor pollutants. But if the industry norms are not being followed, and they are directly putting their waste, it's a more of a administrative and implementation issue rather than treatment issue, actually, right now.
Okay, I would like to add something there. So when we deal with industrial pollutants, the first step is to run a test and make out a list of pollutants. Some of these pollutants can be removed through processes, other than these sustainable processes, just plain sedimentation, etc., etc. There are several of these processes. Okay. Some, not all, some. Some others do get acted upon by the root zone treatment, but majority need a mechanical effluent treatment plant. However, in terms of contextuality and relevance, 98 or 95% of the pollution in the water in our country is caused by non-industrial pollutants. It's largely, human sewer, construction debris, things like those. And the natural processes that we have outlined here can reduce a very large amount of pollution which is occurring in the water with very little cost. And then for the rest, we have to supplement it with the mechanical means. That's the way to go.
Yes, sir. Thank you. That was well answered. Thank you.
Are there any more questions?
We have a question from Ridan. Wants to, if you could please cite a successful case of wastewater at community housing society or individual property level, which is not very technology intensive, requiring high maintenance, also doable wherein the land on hand is limited.
No, I didn't get it. What was that?
I think he's saying is, what is the technology that you can use? Is there a successful one that you can use at a housing society level or at an individual property level? It's not maintenance intensive and is also can be done in a small amount of space. What technology should be used?
See, SBT is very successful on a small scale because it consumes less land area. Root zone treatment is also very successful, and I have seen people do it in a vertical format also. So these are available technologies, and then they need to be tweaked for individual case, and they are reasonably successful. Like,
can you talk about them next time? Show us some examples, pictures of them in the next presentation, maybe?
yeah, sure.
If I can add one point here, in terms of wastewater treatment, there is a system called DWATS, which is much more used in rural context, but across the country, there are now increasing cases where it's been used for such cases of community housing. So because that is a fairly constrained system and manages wastewater in the sense of the sewer system. So it's an alternative for just having a septic tank, but if you have an entire community which is willing to do their treatment on site, and in various cities you have a requirement, such as in Bangalore, where certain housing units of larger than 200 units, I think, are required to be ZLD. So they cannot discharge any of their wastewater, black water or grey water outside of their premises. Of the campus. So there are successful examples of this increasingly now, and they are fairly low tech. In fact, they use the concept of the the SBT system that Sir had talked of, but slightly more refined, because they also deal with fecal matter. So in terms of FSM treatment as well.
Yeah, with respect to DWATS and with respect to the example at a community level, I'm not sure if there is any in Delhi. There might be, which I don't have a knowledge, but there is one in Bhuj, which is in Kutch in Gujarat, and they have done a community DWATS treatment, and the water from that, the treated water from that is then used to irrigate because Bhuj is it is in an arid region, so planting and growing trees and all would require some amount of water. Of course, the local species also would require. So to plant, they use this treated effluent to irrigate those plants. They use this treated effluent along the drains. So all their drains are actually now being irrigated through this system using the community waste, treating it through DWATS, and then putting it in use. And it actually makes a very good example of greening the whole city naturally, actually.
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, it's Shashank from School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi.
Yeah.
So I would just draw your attention to one of the most prominent lakes of Delhi, like Neela Haus, near on Aruna Asaf Ali Marg. So it's also a lake which is revived through the ecological interventions such as bioremediation. So this was the case we studied last time, in our case study. So this is a prominent example in Delhi that we can refer to on bioremediation, I think.
Yeah, you are right. Actually, the Delhi government has now almost for the last 10 years have been experimenting with different projects and different technologies. They have done a lot of experimentation and pilot work. and they are on the cusp of launching a large-scale, rejuvenation exercise. And all these processes are experimental only till you meet with success, because some of them are dependent on the kind of temperatures that are around us. Some of them are dependent on how a certain kind of bacteria will grow. Some of them are dependent on the water quality itself. So there are a lot of successes which have been met in these pilots, and Nila Hawes is definitely one of them.
Manish,
More
I had one suggestion was, we learned both about, there was the issue both of recharge was brought up, as well as the issue of wastewater treatment. And I know the linked issues, but I know Sahana talked about how there was a loss of recharge potential. And I'm wondering, when you speak next week, whether those two issues could be sort of sifted separately a little bit. So we learn about, for example, if a landscape architect is charged with designing an office site or a mall or a campus, what are the things they should do? Give us a little primer. These are the things: so much space, such a big site, should have this much recharge space. What are the recharge options? Are those bioswales or pits, or ideally you recharge right into the ground, or it depends on the soil profile? Give us a little primer on what are the best practices in recharge, and then separate out the wastewater issues. So we can see both. Give us some good examples of recharge as well. Which colonies have done good recharge, which haven't? Has recharge been successful in Delhi? I know there was an implementation that I heard. I'm not sure about this, but they said it was too successful in Friends Colony and in Defense Colony, and the water level went up too high. If there could be someone talking about recharge, what happened to these norms that were set up? Were they successful? A little kind of study or analysis of what's been done so far, and has it had success? And what are the lackings thereof?
So session 2 is totally dedicated to running the audience through with successful and great success stories from wherever, all over, and then some of the work which is being done currently in Delhi, or that we know of, that Yusuf and my office are doing. But it's less of one is a lot of professionals keep asking us about the basics of how this thing works, and today was dedicated to running it through the basics. Next session is looking mostly at how it has been accomplished in reality, because a lot of it is experimental and theory, but there are numerous projects which have achieved this, and I think we'll run you through with them in terms of how it has been done.
Okay. Any other questions from the audience?
I can see a question on the screen: how insect breeding is being managed. Okay, so it's very simple. When we do a wetland, or when we do a natural thing like this, what we commonly know as helicopter flies. So they are introduced into the system naturally, and they feed profusely on the insects. They keep them in check. Almost you can say they eliminate them. There are birds which are attracted to such water developments, and they prey on these insects. So nature has its own way of creating a balance. The only bad thing that projects do is that they go and pave the slush, or the wetland areas, and which removes the breeding ground for these helicopter flies or birds which prey on the insects. So when you do the paving, then you can't stop the insects. That's how it is.
There's a question on, well, Sujata is pointing out that the Shahadra Lake, very welcome metro city, treats 2 million liters per day of water. And then Priyanka is asking about the streets. Is it possible to align street infrastructure with green and blue network? As it is not unknown that streets are the biggest catchment carrier of water, resulting in urban flooding. Is it possible to look through this design approach on existing street networks?
Okay, I can take that if you permit. So basically, if you see historically, in Iran, there was a development which is known as Isfahan. So Isfahan was a shopping precinct. What it did was, it collected the rainwater and it had a swale in the center, which was planted. And traditionally, it was a streetscape which looked very beautiful due to the greenery, and the recharge of groundwater happened right where either the runoff from rainfall or other kind of runoff originated. So you don't travel long distances for recharge to happen, you do it locally. So it's very much possible to align the infrastructure with the water network, and it's in fact advisable to do it locally in all situations rather than carrying water over long distances and doing it somewhere. This is a good point actually, and it's the spirit of doing this new methods.
I would like to comment on that idea, and with context to Delhi itself. So the IIT Delhi has prepared so Delhi has a stormwater management plan, and the stormwater management plan majorly looks at the idea of how we can, which has been prepared by IIT Delhi. So they are actually looking at the possibilities of how we can decentralize in a decentralized form, actually use the streets, use the hard areas, and with respect to catchment, take that to the nearest water body or nearest lake, and not make it a centralized system and then put it in the Yamuna. So right now the system is that we catch all the storm water and we put it in the drains, and those drains actually carry it back to the Yamuna. So all the water which was actually could have been utilized in recharging or could have been stored actually goes into river Yamuna and flows downstream. So now they have prepared a stormwater management plan in which they have identified almost around 500 to 600 water bodies which can help into making a decentralized stormwater management rather than making a centralized system. And it would reduce a lot of infrastructure cost and also help into mitigating the flooding aspect, which is very prominent in Delhi, especially in certain areas.
Sort of a related question, Yusuf. Someone is asking, is there any thought of reviving the Baulis? And how does that happen? What is the plan of action on the Baulis?
So the plan of action, the Baulis were greatly dependent on the groundwater. Now, if you want to restore if you talk about CP at Agrasen Bauli, the water, I don't think if it's there. If it's there, it's very polluted. So we have to draw a stormwater management plan of Delhi, introduce lot of recharge pits around the CP area. So because it's in a circular plan, so the whole slope of the streets and all slope of the hard paved areas needs to be analyzed, and based on that we need to make pockets of recharge pits, and hopefully across time there will be water which we can then see in the Bauli coming up. So those have been happening in Kutch areas, again a arid zone in Gujarat. So they have kind of restored certain Baulis with respect to recharging the ground. But the only way to do it is recharge the ground. Right now, I don't know how the stormwater of CP is being managed. But again, if we decentralize stormwater of Connaught Place and recharge it there, there is a great chance that the Bauli would see water after a few years.
Would you say there are 100 Bali? There used to be 100, right?
Yeah, there used to be 100 Baulis, and now there are only 10 mapped on the archaeological, around 10 mapped on the tourist and archaeological maps. And out of that, only Agrasen Bauli and a couple of more are in a good shape, but rather around 50% are also in a very bad and dilapidated condition.
Okay, I can add something there which may interest the audience. So when I was in college and Connaught Place, the Barakhamba Road development was taking place. So the central park of Connaught Place had these pumps, very large pumps, 100 or I don't know how many horsepowers. And they used to run 24 hours because naturally the geology or the geography of Delhi is such that the central park is a bowl with a very large catchment. And the water simply oozes out of the ground. That was the quantum of water that was there. They used to pump it and throw it into the stormwater drain, which takes it to the Yamuna. That was the quantum of water over there. In those days, all these buildings on the Barakhamba Road and Kasturba Gandhi Marg were under construction. And majority of these buildings had 3 levels of basement. And it was common that the slab, the water will come out like this, like a fountain. That was the quantity of groundwater that was available then. And that is what made the Baulis work, because there was water which was coming in the Bauli. Now, due to, as Sahana just explained to us, this constant urbanization and extraction of groundwater, the water levels have gone down. So these pumps are not running anymore and the buildings are safe and the Baulis have dried out. So I think it's a situation, you keep the recharge, bring the recharge to that level that the Baulis will start getting charged again. Are there any more questions, or I think we can conclude today's session and then look forward to the next one?
Hello?
Yeah.
Am I on?
Yes.
Yeah, sir, I'm working in DDA. So I just wanted to talk about ancient historic structure, Surajkund Water Reservoir, which is near to my place. The structure was built in 10C by Tomar Kings, and it was built basically to fulfill the water needs of the surrounding population. Till now, the structure still looks very magnificent and sturdy and strong, but fails to fulfill the purpose of discharging the water, just because the surrounding catchment has totally changed due to the land use development, the change in land use. So is there, because now I'm in the DDA and it does not come under the jurisdiction, so is there any possibility that ASI just in consultation with some landscape architect can just get involved in this and just change the picture, the reality of the picture? The structure is in present condition. This is what I wanted to ask.
Okay, can I take this? So the interesting thing is that Delhi in its the modern form was founded by the Tomar kings. The first thing they built was the Surajkund structure, because first you have water and then you have the city around it. That is a bit of history to how it happened. And it was about somewhere around 1100 AD, between 1000 AD and 1100 AD, that Delhi was founded in its modern avatar. Now, there are 3-4 such structures. There is Damdama Lake, there is, Suraj Kund, and there is one more lake. So it's just sad that, it's technically, I think Suraj Kund falls in Haryana, and it doesn't come in the purview of ASI. So it's a plethora of government agencies who will decide the fate of that. I don't, we as a nation have to kind of rise up to that level before it happens. But it is a part of our heritage, natural heritage and architectural heritage. We look forward, or we hope that something will happen.
So recently, actually, I did a case study of that structure just because I was involved in some other project. But I just came to know from the guard itself that there is an office of ASI in the premises. So, and even I wanted to ask something about the history of the structure to that ASI official. But as he told me that he got recently transferred and he doesn't know anything about it. So I couldn't get to know anything about it. But whatever I searched it from the net, Google or whatever. But then it's again a very sad state of affairs that being so magnificent and to look for such kind of a place near to your house. It's still in that sad state of affairs that it's not being maintained and it's not being used to the purpose for which it was built.
Yeah. What I feel is there are two ways in which you can, not you, I mean, anyone who takes up can do it. So we are actually taking up a couple of dry water bodies in Delhi, which are existing. And then we are replenishing it with the treated effluent that is coming from the colonies. It is coming from the sewage treatment plants. So that is one way in which one can install a constructed wetland, because that area around has a lot of area around Suraj Kund. So there is a possibility to put a constructed wetland or something and get the water from the nearest STP or somewhere if it is possible, and then replenish the Suraj Kund, which will eventually recharge the ground across time, and then it would have its own water table. The other option is again, you have to do a larger level planning of that area and find out what is its catchment, where its catchment is being broken, because all these water bodies are rain fed, and so you have to re-establish the catchment back. I mean, wherever the catchment has been stopped or been impacted, the water has been diverted for whatever reasons. That is why these water bodies go dry. So you have to re-establish that catchment with respect to a study, and then it can happen. Or the other option is, which is a more easier but more expensive, is to get water and replenish it from a second or a source of a different source, of course, after treating it to an acceptable level.
Yeah, I think I can just add something that particularly the Suraj Kund one, it has a very large hinterland or a basin area. The natural rainwater flows and gathers there in the form of a lake, which is adequate to keep it charged for the rest of the year. And the geology is impervious, so it doesn't percolate down. The trouble there is that wherever that catchment is coming and flowing into it, this urbanization has caused the water to get consumed before it reaches here. So I think it doesn't fall in Delhi, it falls in Haryana. It's got different set of problems.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions? So we'll conclude. There's one thing that I have in my mind is, Yusuf, you were going to tell us, maybe next time you can tell us about the Jal Board's efforts. We were talking about the Jal Board having a very broad vision of how to restore the wetlands and the water body. Kind of in a little more detail, you can explain to us.
Yeah, so the pilots that I showed today, the 3 pilots, I would discuss them in detail. So so what is the magnitude? So I mean, in case of water body, so what are the problems related to water bodies. I mean, right now we were talking very generally about the water resource as a natural resource as a general, but then I would specifically talk about water bodies. What are the problems with drains, and what are the problems with new water bodies that we want to create, and the systems. So I would definitely discuss a larger thing that Jal Board and all the other organizations of Delhi government are involved.
Thank you. Any other questions from anyone? Well, then we'll conclude then. We've had an excellent session. Thank you, Minesh, Yusuf, Sahana, for giving us such insight into our water resource and how some of it is being squandered, how people are now learning to be wiser with it, how we are implementing change in a slow but steady manner, and how we can all, great to have a checklist for all of you next time. For all the 70, 80 people who attended today, these are the 10 things we want, the three of you want us to all to do. Give us a checklist on every project, make sure you do this, so that we have some homework. So with that, thank you very much. I really appreciate it. And I thank the audience too for hanging in there and listening to this wonderful session. And hopefully we will have a great participation from you all next week also. Thank you, Harpreet, who organized this. Thank you, Harpreet, and our group who organized this with all of them and putting it together in such a immaculate fashion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Binu. Bye, Yusuf. Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you, and bye.
Thank you and bye.
Thank you.